What's up, comrades? Hope everyone's doing great. We're here to talk about The Last Kingdom. The Last Kingdom is a major story event. It's the 1.5 anniversary. Yes, I'm pretty sure. And again, we already got introduced to Crown and Chime, and we're gonna do their Bond stories here because their Bond stories actually take place in the previous story, with just like Red Hood, where they're all traveling. The Bond story work, it really gets like there's a lot of that episode. That little episode's carrying a lot of like the Bond story action in terms of the Pilgrims, at least, because we get all three of them like slammed into the like tiny little part of like the main story where they're all traveling together. But it also introduces a character, Kilo, who is she's like Diva, or she's like Diva from God, Diva. What a waste of potential that fucking game was. I can't remember what it's called anymore. But I'm still a little sick, or I got allergies or something. I'm like congested, so I apologize. But oh my gosh. But yeah, she's like Diva in that she rides around in a mech, and otherwise she's kind of like useless. And there's a whole thing about how she's like got a lot of heart, but her skills are just not up to par. And so like she's not a mass-produced Nikke because she keeps like a very strong personality, and I guess that's like a part of what so people with strong personalities or strong natural talent tend to be like found out, and then they become like real Nikkes instead of like mass-produced Nikkes. So she got that, but then like she was bouncing around between different like squads. This gets brought up in the Bond story. I should just get to the Bond story. So we're gonna start with hers because her Bond story actually begins before The Last Kingdom, and then we'll do The Last Kingdom. And the other Bond stories take place before as well, but whatever. We'll just do them afterwards because it's really not that big of a deal. Technically, they're supposed to take place like during the previous episode, and then the actual event takes place afterwards after they return. But what should we do? Maybe we'll just do all the Bond stories up front, because I guess it is the proper order of things. Not that I'm sticking to it. There's also this is going up in like February, but they back here in December timeframe, they released an update, and they added like they put everything in like historical order, like when things actually take place, and it's pretty much just like the story straight down, and then kind of like what we've been doing. But then there's some like side events, like the ones I do that are just like, you know, a biscuit story or whatever, that are actually like important to like the main story, and a lot of those we haven't even gotten to yet. But I'm looking at this timeline, and like they exist, and there's the Stellar Blade collab, which also takes place like around this time as well. So I might delve into that and just knock out those events. Because they are part of like you get information that is like relevant to like the main story, apparently, and then and also I mentioned Rapskillion and how there's like a whole kind of like these like after you beat a level, you can go back and do a couple quests and get some like more gems. And they have like these stories with various characters. One of them is Rapskillion, and apparently those are like very important to the story too, according to like Shift Up and how they have their like timeline set up for relevance. So we might just do like a run through of all that. I think I'm gonna wait until he comes back in more relevance a little bit later before we do. I mean, it's like he popped in here and it's like, who the fuck is this guy? But but we already got past that point, so it's too late. So I think he comes up again very importantly in like the main story a bit later. And so I think before we hit that, we'll go through all his like little side story adventures, so we get like a real kind of encapsulation of Rapskillion and his whole shebang. All right, so anyway, so Kilo's Bond story. So us and the counters are just like hanging out. We just finished the mission where we're protecting an elevator from some raptures, and then we're talking about like Ainz is complaining as usual about how like, oh, why we're in grunt missions, special commandos unit, all this stuff. And then we get a call from Mana, and she is like, and Mana is like the head of MMR. I don't know if she's the head, but I think she is. We run into her a lot. We run into her with like the prison and like a lot of MMR stuff, and eventually she gets her own little event, and this is what her event is actually one of the main story things, so maybe we'll get to it sooner than later because it doesn't come out till like year 3, I want to say. Okay. Let's see. Okay, there's a project that's out there, and she needs us to go rescue it. Meanwhile, we get introduced to Kilo and Talos. Talos is her mech that has like an AI, generative AI. Has actual AI that Kilo built. And so they're like stuck in the mud, and they're like chit-chatting about what to do next and what's going on. And then Talos is like, well, counters are in a mission nearby, and there's like 100%, 99% chance they're going to come rescue us because Mana will send them. And Kilo's like, wow, you're like not Nosferatu, like Nostradamus. And then look, the counters do show up. We like chat with them for a little bit. They're all kind of like, oh wow, a giant robot. And then Neon's like less impressed. She's like, it's less of a giant robot and more of whatever. And then they we talk about how her mission, she's a member of like Heavy Graham, and how the whole Heavy Graham is like these Nikkes that ride vehicles essentially, and like they got these like mech suits. And then her and Rappy get a whole conversation about how like wouldn't it be better to like ride in a tank? That makes more sense than like a robot. And then something about how like the machines run on like the same core as a Nikke, so like having them they tried making like animal which is fucking awesome, like animal robots that they could ride in, and that like didn't work out too well, but the humanoid robot seems to be the best call. And then she like as I mentioned, she made like the AI. I'm kind of jumping around a little bit in the story. It's a lot of lore dumping around. Let's see, wanting to return back. Oh, so we talk about taking her back, and then we're like, oh no, we're going to the outpost. And she's like, oh, I've never been to the outpost before. Can I come? And they're like, yeah. And then she talks more about the AI. It's like tactical assistance and logistical optimization system is what TALIS stands for. And TALIS is a tactical autonomous vehicle human type, or TAV or whatever. So they need pilots, blah, blah, blah. The whole squad gets lent out to other people. So it's a squad, but the squad doesn't go out together. They go out to like support. Same core, non-human designs. Oh, and then there's some issues with Heavy Graham because it costs like a lot of money, and then you put like Kilo in Talos, and you send Talos out, and it's like B-rated in the meta. So it's like, why are we spending all this fucking money for like a slightly, not even like barely better than like a regular Nikke, like mass-produced Nikke essentially, to have like this thing come in and not really do much more. It's like super expensive. And so they're talking about, she's like, oh, if we can't like figure out a way to make this like cost-effective by like being more productive or finding like a real strong purpose, they might scrap it, and then Telos is going to end up in a heap, and then I'm going to end up like bouncing around to squads again. And we're like, what do you mean by bouncing around to squads? She's like, I don't want to talk about it. Anyway, yeah. Oh, and then at some point she mentions that everyone else in Heavy Graham is like designed or specifically focused on like combat, and then we're like, wait, so does that mean you're not? And she's like, I'm not. And so we do some more prying, and she mentions that she's like done all these modifications and all this stuff, but that like she's really not like focused on combat like the rest of them, and so she doesn't like necessarily have like a purpose or whatever. And so then they get into a conversation about that, like the counters, mostly Rappy and Kilo and whatnot. And it's mostly like, hey, maybe we can help you train, figure it out. So we call Mana and say like, hey, is it cool if we borrow Kilo for a while? And she's like, sure enough. And then Rappy mentions going to Elysion for their training facility. And Kilo gets very concerned because she's a member of Missilis, obviously, and not Elysion. But then Rappy's like, no, we're good with Ingrid. So we head over to the training facility, and there's some commentary about Ingrid like making strange noises, and Rappy's like, oh no, that's just how she is, it's not you. Anyway, so what we're gonna do, or what Rappy's gonna do, is she's gonna put her through like a series of tests, just doing like survival, combat, repair, like whatever, like all these different things, and see how she does. And then we'll run like we'll like talk about it, and then give her some like feedback, and then we'll run it again and see what happens. So she goes through all these things like combat, blah 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 blah, and then it's like, oh, how'd I do? And she's like, wait, and Rappy's like, wait till the end of the second test, and we'll give you the full results. So then Rappy kind of throws some advice at her and stuff, and then she does them again, and then we get to the so it's time for the results. And so we're all sitting around, and Rappy's like, I'm very confused. And Kilo's like, what? And it's like, you got 50 out of 100 on every single task. The first round, so it's like a complete like jack of all tradesness, sort of. And then she's like, oh, is that not good? It's like, it's not really good, but it's not bad either. It's just like you don't specialize in anything. And then like there's a whole and then like the second round, she got 51 in everything. So she universally got slightly better. And there's a whole conversation about how like she needs to pick a specialization or whatever. Like Ainz is really like harping on it because there's like, that's how squads are designed, so that, you know, each member of the squad like covers like a certain area. So like the example given is Signal. No, Signal's the Nikke. Hold up. What is the fuck is their called? It's Signal and Delta, whatever squad they're Scouts. They're Scouts. So the Scout squad, and how like their whole job is like recon and investigation and stuff, and how like Signal is completely designed for like communications and doing this and that, and then Delta is completely designed for like sneaking and kind of like spec ops kind of stuff. And so together they like both have their super specialization, and so they like work well together, right? Like essentially like Signal's the supporter and Delta's like the attacker kind of situation. Let's see. And then they talk about Kilo's kind of like a jack of all trades, but she's not like that good at anything. So and then, you know, there's some conversation about like, well, you know, actual being out in combat is different than being in the training room, so maybe it'll be different if we go out. So maybe we should go do that instead. And so we invite Kilo to come along on our next like adventure guarding the elevator or whatnot. Gets Kilo down. Rappy tries. Oh yeah. And there's a conversation about that, and Rappy's like, well, maybe you come out and you'll do a great job, and like maybe you can't be a jack of all trades, and that's not a bad thing. And Kilo's like, oh yeah, and she goes from like being disheartened to being happy, and then she leaves, and then Ainz is like, that's fucked up, Rappy. And Rappy's like, what are you talking about? And Ainz is like, don't give her hope when there's no hope. And it's like, damn, Ainz, like, fuck, man. Anyway, so we contact Mana about the mission and get approval, and we're like, hey, whatever you do, don't mention it to Sayun, because you know she's a bitch. And she's like, got it. And so the day the mission arrives, and Kilo actually does a fantastic fucking job. Like, she's all over the place. Like, she's constantly like resupplying, she's doing combat to help, she's restoring the elevator when it gets damaged, yada yada. And it's just like a super helpful all around kind of thing. And so at the end, we're like, wow, you really can be a jack of all trades, but you definitely need more training. Like, there was definitely a lot of improvement that could be made, but if you just work on those improvements, you could be excellent around the board, just being a jack of all trades. And then she gets happy, but then she kind of mentions that it's probably not going to have a chance to like go out with them again, because we're like, oh, we'd love to have you again. And it's because Missless is moving Heavy Graham from being like a support squad to other squads to just being like going on solo missions, because it became so expensive to like operate them and do repairs and everything on the machines that they were starting to like kind of tax the units they were going out with, right? Like, they were essentially charging them, and then these units were like, hey, we're paying like 3 times the rate of like a mass-produced Nikke to get like a support on this thing, and we're getting like the exact same results. So so that it's like, it's really not, no one wants to hire him anymore, because it's like, wait, I don't want to pay for this. It's like, we're not getting like the bang for the buck to like help out with this whole situation. So they're gonna start training them on like doing solo missions to see how that goes. And so she's got a solo mission coming up, which leads directly into the Last Kingdom. But let's see, finally left his place. Oh, and then she kind of gets sad because she mentioned something about having a place to belong, and she finally felt like she had a place to belong. And then this is where we learn that she was like, after she became like a Nikke, she was like bounced around all these different squads, and no one wanted her because she really wasn't that good by herself. And eventually she got the Heavy Graham, and it was like, oh, finally I can like help, and I can like be of use. But now it's like she's essentially like one step away from like the scrapyard again, because Heavy Graham might just be like going the way of the dinosaur, if you will, because they're too expensive to maintain. After she leaves, the counter's so bad for her, and we talk about how she'll be all right, and they're like, what do you mean? And it's like, did you, and then we point out, like, did you notice Talus's chest? And they're like, why are you looking at someone's chest for, you perv, you baka hentai? So we're not going to complete the thought about what's going on there, but Crown notices the same thing in the Last Kingdom, so we'll talk about it more there. Meanwhile, Kilo and Talos are talking about their upcoming test, and they're like, oh man, I'm super concerned about failing and going to the scrapyard, so we have to do a great job. And then she thinks again about how she wishes that someday she'll have a place where she can belong. Which ends her bond story. And again, that leads right into Last Kingdom. I probably should have saved this for the third one, but I didn't. So next up's going to be Chime. Well, let's actually do Crowns. I'm pretty sure Crowns takes place before Chimes does, because Chime references a conversation that occurs during Crowns. So hold up, my notes just closed. Yeah. So blah blah blah. Crown. Okay. So Crown's bond story actually takes place after all the events of 26, and it starts off afterwards, just because we're like cleaning our room. And we pick up this chess piece, this knight chess piece that has white knight written on it. And that reminds us of our time with Crown and Chime. And so we think back to episode 26, where we're all just kind of like hanging out, walking around and stuff. And after a battle, we notice that Crown and Chime are like whispering to each other and staring at us. Ainz goes to ask them what they're doing, and they just ignore her, and they chat some more secretly. Then Crown tells us that we're a great commander and that she wants us to join the kingdom as her advisor. And we're like, Nani desu ka? And then Chime extol the beauties, the benefits of the kingdom and stuff. They tell us that there's currently a group that numbers in about 81. And what they don't tell us, that we learn about later, is that this number includes all the animals that they take care of. And that it used to be 70, but that with the addition of like everyone here, it equals 11, which doesn't make sense, because I'm like, wait a second, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's only 5, and then 6 if you count Marion. So like, we'd say they're, or say they're 5. Anyway, because she says it went up from 70 to 81, and I'm like, okay, sure. So let's see. Then we go back and forth with them about the kingdom. It guards a great treasure. No one can know about exactly what that treasure is unless they join. And she does mention, like, teehee, we're not a criminal enterprise, though. We're very good, and we just do just and righteous things. Eventually, we tell her that we want to know more. And then Chime gets concerned about how much Crown is talking about. And Crown calms her down a little bit. And then Chime is like, okay, I can tell you a little bit. She then goes on about the gardens and how they have banquets every day and everyone's invited and they eat. And then about how the bedchamber is the most impressive part because you can look out on the moon every night and see the surrounding landscape, and it's a beautiful castle and all this stuff. And then she mentions it's real. Everything's real. The food's real. The people are real. The stars and sky are real, unlike the Ark, right? At that point, we're like, geez, Chime, you seem to know a lot about the Ark and what it's like. And then she's about to spill her past, and then Crown's like, Chime, stop. And and then she compliments us because Chime is usually very tight-lipped, but somehow our personality, our just force of charisma, has gotten her to open up a little bit. And then she mentions this is part of the reason why we'd be such a great advisor to her, because we're so good at charming and understanding things and whatnot. We then. Let's see. Yeah, they talk about how they live in an actual castle, but then we're like, wait, why do you live in an actual castle, like an old medieval castle? And they're like, oh, we won't tell you unless you join. And then she reaffirms that we would be a great advisor again. We say we can't because we got other responsibilities. Marion kind of comes up as this as well. And she's like, okay, I understand. And then a bit later on, we're just sitting around, not able to sleep, thinking about stuff when we see Crown walking by. And so we call out to her, and she comes over and sits with us. And then we just have some idle chit chat and sit awkwardly for a little bit. And then the subject of our rejection of being her advisor comes up again. And then we again mention we have a promise to keep. And then Crown's like, is this to Marion? And then we're like, yes. And she's like, okay, that makes sense. I understand. And then she encourages us to complete our task and then return to Marion and stuff. We then ask her about the kingdom some more. And she talks about how Chime was the first citizen and that the kingdom was born. The whole point of the kingdom the whole point of the kingdom is to grant the wishes of the subjects of the kingdom, and that the kingdom began because Chime's greatest wish was to be ruled by a king. And so Chime took that responsibility on herself to grant her wish and give her what she wanted. And then we mentioned that it seems like the kingdom's granted her wish as well, because Crown's sole wish is to defend and help other people. And so the creation of the kingdom has allowed her to do that. And she laughs and is like, oh yes, this is why you'd be such a great advisor. I wish you would really come. And then again we say we can't because we got to do what we got to do. And then we wish each other good night and go to sleep. Soon enough, the White Knights mention that they must head back to the kingdom. They've been gone for too long. And we mentioned that they say something, and then they're like, oh, is this another plot to try to get us to come? And they're like, maybe. But they want to remind us. Oh, and then they give us the chess piece and say don't forget them, or if we ever need anything, they will come to help and such. And that this chess piece is mainly a reminder that they can always ask for help. And then we talk turns to Marion again, and Crown mentions that she's looking forward to the day, Crown mentions that Crown is looking forward to the day when when we are strong enough to protect Marion, and then she can come out and they can be together again. Until then, Crown will protect her as a member of the kingdom. We then say goodbye for good, and that wraps up her Bond story. Now, the last Bond story of this adventure is Chime. And Chime's an interesting one because Chime actually didn't come out till 3rd anniversary, and this is 1.5 anniversary. I think. This might be 2.5. What was 1.5? So we had Overzone, and then we had Red Ash, and we had Last Kingdom, and then we had... Yeah, because that was 3rd, so 2.5. Yeah, this is 1.5. Yep. Okay, so 1.5, and then she didn't come out for another year and a half, but it takes place in the exact, still in chapter 26, and slightly after, or around the same time as Crown's thing, kind of what that's going on. So, during chapter 26, Chime orders a halt so that the commander can rest, because she's very observant and she's very tactical and strategic and all this stuff. And she plays it off as not needing to give him rest, but to give Crown a chance to eat. And we look over and see Crown, and she's looks hungry. So then she orders Ines and Neon to go get some firewood, and then she orders us to help prepare the meal. And she's super pissed off at us because we refuse to be the advisor to Crown. And so she keeps chewing us out, and we're like, hey, girl, you need to chill. And then she mentions how offended Crown is, and because like Chime is like the lady in waiting or whatever. Crown is too like elegant and kingly to like do anything about it, but Chime's not, so she can take care of it. And so to make it up to the kingdom, he's gonna have to be her like aide. So she's like the aide's aide. Hines and Neon come back and they think it's like hilarious that like a Chime is like running around and like yelling at us and make us do all this stuff. And then so we like peeling potatoes and whatnot, and then after we have the meal, we're ready to go. And then Chime asks, she's like, oh, I can regale you with some tales if you would like. So we're like, sure. And then she starts telling us all these like treasure hunting exploits that her and the White Knights have. And then she gets super excited to talk about that. So we're only half listening as she's regaling us. And then she mentions that she knows that we're worried about Rappy, but all's well that ends well, and that Rappy will be fine and she'll do a good job, or he will do a good job rescuing her. She then talks about her time before she had her treasure. And when she mentions treasure, she looks over at Crown, because Crown is like her greatest treasure. Oh. And that even before then, she kept going and she was determined to live and not let her depression or like her loneliness or anything get her down. And that once she found her treasure, and now that she has her treasure, she would sacrifice anything for it. And she mentions that's like Marion and Rappy for us, because Marion, we would do anything, would sacrifice anything for Marion and Rappy. And then she says it's time for another rest. So we attend to the king, and we also notice at this time that again it's like Chime's using the excuse of like Crown, who's a Nikke, who can like not eat for months on end or ever, and who doesn't need rest, because we realize that we're lagging behind, that we're starting to get in. So we thank her for the respite, and then she reminds us that we're the aid to aid status, and to go check on Crown to make sure she's okay. So we have a nice little break, and then we carry on some more. A bit later, Chime finds an abandoned home for everyone to rest in for the night. The counters take over our duties at that juncture so that we can rest, and Chime advises us that we need to rest because she's been pushed pretty hard, but we've also been pushed pretty hard to get to Rappy, and we're like humans, so we're emotionally and physically weak. And at that point, we want to hear more of her story, but she kind of blows us off. But we want to know how her and Crown met, at least. And she thinks we were trying to seduce her and kind of freaks out about it. And then the counter is over to calm her down, as well as Crown. As Crown again asks us to be her advisor. And we mention, because she mentions that we have quite a way with women, because Chime is like very infatuated with us now, which is excellent. And then we decline again. A bit later, we notice that Chime and Crown are whispering to each other, as they like to do, likely about us. The next day, Chime gets flustered with us again, not about rejecting the offer of an advisor as we thought, but because of Marion. We haven't asked to see her or to communicate with her or anything, and she's super confused about that. It's like, do you actually care about this woman and whatnot? And so we talk about that for a bit, but we also don't reveal too much. For some reason, about like the whole situation with the Ark and whatnot. Anyway, we talk about how Marion, what does she mean to us? She's our family, and that, family, what is that thing from Fast and the Furious? It's like family's everything or something. And then Chime offers to tell us about how Marion is doing for the last 3 days of her journey, and we're happy to do that. And she begins at the very beginning, like essentially she tells us, not first affection, second affection. Yeah, that side story where Marion gets dropped off with Crown and Chime and everything that's going on since that point. And that wraps up her bond story, which is now going to lead us into the Last Kingdom. So the Last Kingdom, excellent story. So it starts off, we got Kilo, and she's talking to Talos, and they're talking about they're almost out of energy, they're super damaged, that this testing they went on, and this kind of takes place right after a monster, has gone very poorly, and that they're going to have to wait here and wait for rest and wait for a rescue. So she's like, shut everything down, and we'll just kind of like sit here and then not make too much noise so the Raptures leave us alone, because they're just going to see like a broken robot, and then hopefully someone will come along and help us, because we don't have enough energy to do anything else. And so Kilo kind of takes the Hippopotamus, and Talos powers down. Meanwhile, Chime and Crown are moving around, and they stumble upon this giant robot statue looking thing, and Chime's like, ooh, this is excellent. And then they talk about it for a little bit and how appeasing it would be in like the gardens and like the courtyard of the castle to have this giant menacing robot. And so like, we should take it with us. And so they're talking about that. and they end up attaching it to Trombe so they can drag it all the way to like where the kingdom's at. So they're dragging it along, and at some point Kilo wakes up and freaks out because she's like, holy shit, what's happening? And she's like, I don't know what to do. I think I'm just gonna wait until they stop, and then I'll figure it out. And so for a couple hours she's just getting dragged along, and then she starts seeing this beautiful like fortress out of the viewport of Talos, and then she's like, all right, it's time. So then she activates Talos, and then Chime like freaks the fuck out and is like, oh no, it's a rapture, we have to destroy it, right? Because it's like a giant robot, so like what else would it fucking be? And then as they're getting ready to like blow it up or whatever, Kilo pops out. She's like, wait. And then Crown is able to calm Chime down, and then she declares that Kilo and Talos are now part of the kingdom. The sisters, the Chime and Crown and Kilo discuss the kingdom. It is apparently not on the surface. Apparently. I don't know why. But I got confused here because I thought they said something about not being on the surface, but later on they're like, oh no, the kingdom's like an amusement park. It's like this old amusement park that was like on an island. So I think there was like a bad translation. My understanding is there was several like kind of like bad translations that were going on in the earlier times of Nikke, and so sometimes stuff kind of slipped through. So I think they were saying they're not on like the land, they're out in the sea, which is true because they're like on an island, and so you have to cross this like bridge. And we find out later that like over time, like the 100 years or whatever, there's just been like garbage and stuff that's like floated over and like made like more land, but it's all very unstable because it's not actually land, it's like fake land and whatnot. So that's a little bit of the kingdom. Okay. And so then they venture out to like the surface, which again, I'm pretty sure they're referring to the surface as like the continent, like America or whatever, because I don't know if it's ever been official, but I'm pretty sure like the Ark is in like Central America, not like Central like El Salvador. Central is in like Colorado, Kansas kind of area. And so there's like venturing out from that area. Okay. So they head out all the time to collect treasures, do all this stuff. It's one of the duties of the subjects. And then Kilo asks why Crown is a king and not a queen. And then they're like, oh, because kings are higher ranked than queen. Which is based. That's literally the reason. And so she's like, oh, okay. And so the Kilo turns, like, checks on Talos, makes sure she's okay, whatever. And then Talos wants to, like, they kind of, like, chit-chat for a little bit, and they're like, maybe we should just run. And then they refer to Crown and Chime in this kingdom thing as, like, a cult, and then cults are bad. But Talos is like, oh, I can't escape until I have 17 hours of charge, which is enough energy to get them back to the Ark. It's like, okay, we'll stay for now. And then the lunch alarm goes off, the alarm that Kilo set for herself so she could wake up and have lunch. And then... And then they're sitting around like in this castle in the kingdom, and they're like, "Oh, good, it's lunch. That's great. We should definitely do lunch." And then she's like, "Oh, I'm gonna go make lunch." And then Crown's like, "Chime, it's time. Let's go make lunch." And then Chime's like, "Well, actually, it's not my turn to make lunch." And then Crown's like, "Whose time is it?" And it's like, "It's Marion's." And they're like, "Oh, fuck." So later on, inside, Kilo meets Marion. She notices that Marion has like this aura about her and stuff, and then Marion brings out the food, and it's literally just fucking spiders. And Kilo's like, aha, this is hilarious. And then Marion like takes one and eats it, and then Kilo's like, what? And so she's like, oh, this must be like fake spiders or something. It's supposed to be a prank. And so Kilo eats it and then passes the fuck out. I love it. I love Crown and Chime so much. Oh my gosh. And so later, Kilo wakes up and calls Talos and tells her to send a message to the Ark. And then Talos asks about, like, so what about Modernia? And Kilo's like, what? And it's like that woman you were talking to with the spiders. Like, wait, you mean Marion is Modernia, the heretic? And then Kilo gets super excited because if she can, like, report that Modernia is here, that's going to help out her cause and give her, like, sway in the Ark. At that point, Marion walks in. And she like, oh, hello, are you trying to reach back out to the Ark? Are you concerned about something? That'd be too bad if someone massacred you. And then Kilo's like, what? And Marion, like, essentially, like, very subtly, like, threatens to destroy her and Talos if any harm comes to anyone she likes, which includes Chime and Crown. So essentially, like, telling the Ark about anything that's going on here, like, Kilo's going to get, like, destroyed. And so Kilo's like, hey, Talos, I think I told you to do, please stop doing that. And Marion's like, very good, and leaves. So then the next day, they're all sitting around at breakfast, and Kilo tells Chime her food is delicious because Chime is an excellent cook, and Crown is so proud of Chime. And then Chime is proud of herself. So they talk about what Marion is planning for the day. She's like, I'm going to rake leaves. And then what about you, Chime? And she's like, oh, I'm going to show Kilo the ropes about the kingdom. And then Crown is... it's like, what about you, Crown? She's like, oh, I'm going to go for a little walk outside the kingdom and kind of check on things. And so this is where we learn, they start talking about how it's an old tourist spot on an artificial island, which is super fun. And that they had to gather materials like electronics and batteries and wood and metal and shit so they can like maintain this, because it's been like going on for like 100 years, right? Like this thing was built before the Rapture invasion, which was 100 years ago. And so they've been like fixing it up and doing stuff all the time. And then we learn at this point, well, we learn in this story, but we learn this from the Bond story, that Talos has a core like a Nikke, and that she's also has a 3D printer. I don't know if I mentioned it before. She's got like a super advanced 3D printer, so if you just like feed her material, she can like produce anything, essentially, like her bullets and whatnot. I don't think I mentioned that in the Bond story. Yeah. So there's a whole thing about that where they talk about in the Bond story too, where she can like produce bullets, she can produce repair materials, she has like I'd assume a furnace besides just like a 3D printer to like melt things down and then like rebuild things up. And so they're like, what? What do you mean? And then so Kilo's like, Talos, are there any like batteries in the area? And she's like, yes. And then they run off and they come back and they have enough batteries to last for like months. And Chime and Crown are like, what? And then they go back to the castle and Talos makes repairs with the 3D printer. And Chime and Crown are like over the moon. And they're like, this is the best subject we've ever had. This is so exciting. So back in the castle, they talk about how great Kilo is and how she helped them so much and with the fences and repairs and such. And she helped with the modernizing, getting like the weapons fixed up on the walls so that, and making sure they had rounds and everything. And they're like super excited. Like, oh, this is so great. This is the best thing ever. We also learned around this point that there's like, I don't think it's optical camouflage on the kingdom, but they have some sort of like Rapunzel style, like deadening zone. So like the Raptures cannot sense that there's anybody here and they just kind of ignore it. Right. It's not like Eden where there's like, there's the optical camouflage, so like you can't see it or sense it. This I don't think this is optical camouflage. I can't remember if they mentioned optical camouflage or not with them, but there's like the Raptures, there's like no way for the Raptures, there's like all this kind of disruptions and stuff so that signals can't get in or out, and so the Raptures can't sense what's going on. At some point Kilo's like, oh man, I'm so tired, it's been a long day, I'm gonna go lay down in bed, and then Crown like notices that something's off with her. So later in her room, Kilo talks to Talos about what would happen if she stayed. And then they talk about how she would be integrated and more important part of the kingdom. And then she puts Talos to sleep and she thinks about how it's actually Talos, not her, that's important. The next day, Marion comes again to talk to Kilo, and this time they talk more seriously instead of just threats. They talk about belonging, how they're both looking for a place to belong, and how this might be the place for them because Crown and Chime are so excellent of Nikkes, I guess, they're not human beings, that they can find a place here where they can do good and they can be like loved and taken care of and stuff like that. And then all of a sudden, the giant bell rings, and they're like, "Uh-oh, what does that bell mean?" It means the kingdom's under attack. Oh no! So we head over to the whole group meeting up, Kilo, Marion, Crown, and Chime, and they're like noticing that there's a whole mass of Raptures that are like coming right at them, and they're like, and Chime's like, we better get out of here and escape, but Crown's like, no, we have to fight. And she asks Kilo if she will as well, and Kilo's like, yes. Then Crown sets off the signal for aid to an unknown source. They then rout the Raptures and congratulate themselves on what they're doing. Meanwhile, up on a hill watching this whole thing are Indivilia and Chatterbox. Yep, here they are. They discuss how they want to follow the Rapture horde and discover that they just like saw this huge mass of Raptures like moving around, and they're like, oh, let's go follow them. So they follow them and then discover these like pilgrims up here on the surface. So they discuss like what they could possibly be hiding in this castle and why they're defending it so like vigorously and whatnot, and that something must be very valuable since they fought tooth and nail for it. So Nivelia creates some Raptures and she gives them optical camo. Oh, that's where the optical camo comes. I remember now. So she covers them in optical camo and sends them in with the horde, but instead of fighting, they're going to just like sneak in so they can do some recon. Meanwhile, over at the kingdom, we discovered that the jamming signal that they had set up so that Raptors couldn't find them is still working. But then Talos mentions that she's been sending out signals for rescue, like the signal she started all the way at the beginning to be like, hey, come help us, I'm stuck, before Crown and Chime even found him. The signal's been going off this whole time, and even though it's like it's been blocked by the jammer, that apparently something leaked out, and that gave the Raptures information that they were here. And so Kilo immediately turns it off and like apologizes, and Crown's like, you should leave. And Kilo's like freaking out. She's like, you're so mad. And then she's like, oh, I just one mistake. I'm so sorry. And then Crown's like, oh no, I'm not mad about that. Like, fuck that. I don't care about that. If you stay, you're probably going to die. Like, Crown is an excellent fighter. Marion's like a world-class fighter. Chime holds her own with strategy and tactics and stuff. They constantly talk about she's not a fighter, but anyway, but she's all about the tactics and strategy, and so she's involved. And then Kilo's just like Kilo. She's just some like random Nikke, and so she stays. There's a high chance that she's going to die, but they want her to stay because she can help, and there's things she can do, but you know, it's essentially Crown's like, as my subject, I want to protect you, so you should leave, because I actually do care. And then Kilo's like. And then Crown's like, and then Kilo says something about like, well, do you need me? And then Crown's like, don't let this influence your decision, but yes, we could definitely use you. Like, we definitely need you here, and we want you here. And so Kilo decides she's willing to stay. And Crown mentions that she has to decide if she's willing to stay and become a subject with the kingdom, or if she wants to leave and go back to the Ark and just forget about all this stuff. But either way, it's her decision. And if she leaves, she'll definitely be safe. Kilo's kind of freaking out. She doesn't know what to do, so she asks for some more time, and Crown's like, yeah, that's fine. So for now, she's going to help Chime repair the walls. And then the Rapture wave comes. Crown sends Chime off to keep working on stuff. Wait, hold on. Okay. Yeah, so they keep fighting, and then this goes on for like 3 days. So after these 3 days, they finally realize that there's got to be a heretic out there that's kind of controlling that all this stuff's going on. And that they are specifically, because the Raptures aren't just like rolling in and like firing randomly or doing like whatever crazy Rapture stuff they're like very specifically targeting certain areas. They're very specifically kind of like being involved in the combat, and there's definitely somebody who's like in charge. Oh yeah, and at some point, Crown at some point sent Chime off to kind of figure out what's going on and to see, you know, kind of sneak. She's super sneaky, and so to go and sneak and see who the leader is and see what's going on and stuff like that. And Crown at this point mentions that Chime is really like the strategist of the group, and that she is very good at strategizing and tactics and all that stuff. Oh no, she hasn't sent him off yet. Okay, so she summons Chime because Chime is the tactician, and so then Chime reports in and says, "Hey, three of the barracks in the supply area were exploded." And then they both are like, oh, what about the fucking door? And then they run off. And so Kilo's like, what's this door about? And then Marion gets like quiet. And so she follows them in, and the door is fine, but Kilo's confused. Like, what is this crazy, like super futuristic looking door in this like amusement park castle doing here? And so Crown's like, come in. And so she opens up the door, and this is like the treasure she's been guarding that she didn't tell the commander about, but she takes him in there, and she shows her the seed. And it's not just any seed, it's a superfood that is like, was developed specifically to save humanity. And it's like, it can grow anywhere. It grows super fast. It's like, has tons of nutrition, and it's like just taking this to like the Ark would like sustain the Ark for like ever, right? Because it could grow underground and it could do all this stuff. And so then Kilo's like, well, why don't you give it to the Ark? And then Crown gets very serious and is like, the Ark is not to be trusted, which is facts. So they talk about how Chime and Crown have full faith that humans will reclaim the surface. And when they do reclaim the surface, Crown and Chime need to be there with this seed to help them be able to survive. So back outside, Chime talks about all the, about infiltrating this is where she talks about infiltrating the Raptures to find out who the heretic is in charge and stuff. Meanwhile, back over with Indivilia and Chatterbox, they're watching all this stuff about the seed, and we get hints about this because it does a very good job of like, if you're looking at the pictures of like in the visual novel, you see that it's instead of just like a normal screen, it's like someone's recording something. And so Indivilia and Chatterbox are the Rapture's in there with them, like looking at all this stuff, and then they're seeing this and they're seeing the seed and everything, and then Indivilia is like mocking them, and Chatterbox is super enthralled and starts laughing, and Indivilia's like, what's so fucking funny? And then he says, Marion, and then, well, he says the other name of Marion, but he's talking about Marion, and then Indivilia's like, huh? A bit later on, we're in like a dream of Crown's, and she's dreaming about when Chime found her alone in the castle, and her whole so Crown's whole squad is like dead, and then Chime rolls up and is like, "What's going on? Who are you?" And she's like, "I'm all alone." And it's like, "Oh, why are you here?" And she's like, "I have to protect this place." And at that point, Crown wakes up, and Marion's standing around, and they talk about how Marion's like, "I can help fight," and Crown's like, "No, you shouldn't fight." And she's like, "Well, maybe you should. Maybe I should." And Crown's like, "Hmm." And then at that point, Crown like runs to the corner and like smashes something, and it's the hidden rapture that's been observing them. And then she's like, "Oh no, they had a spy." And then she cries out for Chime because the fact that this thing's around recording when Chime like left to do recon means that they know Chime is coming. And so we head back over to Indivilia and Chatterbox, and that's right, Chime has been captured. So Chatterbox and Indivilia are beating the shit out of Chime, demanding answers to her questions, demanding to know more, all this stuff. They're like torturing her, and they're threatening her with death and with corruption. And then she's like, "Oh, fuck yourselves, I will never betray the king," and all this stuff, because Chime is the best. And then they try to like negotiate with her, and she refuses. She's like, "Absolutely not." She's like, "If you just give us the seed or like tell us something or give us Marion, then like we'll leave you guys alone. You can do whatever." And she's like, "I refuse to dishonor the king by doing whatever." And she gives this fucking epic speech about loyalty to the crown and how she is more noble and strong than they could ever imagine being. And she tells them to do their worst. And this stuns Indivilia, and Chatterbox like, "What the fuck?" And then Chatterbox states that he's envious of her because she has something to like live for, or something to like fight for or something. Back at the castle, Crown is getting ready for her rescue mission. She orders Marion and Kilo to guard the kingdom. Kilo then recognizes Trombe as Crow. I don't know what the fuck that means. I think it's so when we were learning the Bond story, we learned about the tactical whatever fucking thing Talus is, and then there was animal one. So the horse is probably one of those. But she recognizes Trombe after she gets summoned, and then while she's getting ready to like ride off, this box gets flung over the wall, and Talos scans it, and she's like, "It's not a threat, but don't open it." And Crown's like, "Nope." She opens it up, picks it up, and it's fucking Crown's head, or not Crown's head, Chime's head. And so then we skip ahead, and Chime is like charging towards this hill where Indivilia and Chatterbox are. Chatterbox says he's going to go off to find Marion and leaves, and then Indivilia gets ready for a fight and gets like fucking knocked down by crime charge. Like she lances the shit out of her, and then Crown looks around and finds Chime's body, and then she's like, "There it is." And so then we go back to the time when she opened the box, and Crown is ordering Kilo and Marion to guard the base, and she's like, "I'm gonna go get Chime's body and I'm gonna save her." And Kilo's like freaking out, and she's like, "How will you do that?" Something. And Talos speaks up, and he's like, I can preserve her head, right? Because we know that if you can preserve the head in like one of those boxes, the brain, then you can easily resurrect like a Nikke. And so he has like a brain cage, or sorry, Talos, she has, because she's like a female android or AI. So she has a brain cage. She has brain cage capabilities for 1 hour, right? And then she has the capability to like resuture the head to the body and make sure everything is good to go. And so she'll do that, but Crown's only got 1 hour. And so back to the present, Crown gathers up Chime's body, and Indivilia is like threatening her from like the ground. She's like yelling at her and stuff. And then Crown's like completely ignoring her, just mentions like, "All right, it's been 15 minutes. She then stabs Indivilia again just for good sake, and then Trombe like stomps the shit out of her, and she's like, "All right, that was enough of that." Then she rushes back off to the castle. So once she gets there, Kilo and Marion get so back at the castle, Kilo and Marion are getting ready to fight Chatterbox and all these raptures, and then dun to dun, Pioneer shows up. Hell yeah, Scarlet, Rapunzel, and Snow White all show up. So they help them fend off and drive off Chatterbox, who seems he says some crazy shit to like Marion, and he seems very pleased about this whole thing. And so after all that, Pioneer talks about how things must be desperate, like super desperate, if they were called in, because normally like Crown and Chime would not summon them for any reason because they can handle themselves. And then Crown rolls up, and Talos takes Chime's body, and Rapunzel's like, "Oh my gosh, let me help," because that's like her main bag. And so Rapunzel and Talos take Chime's head and body and go off to like work on her and make sure she's going to be okay. Outside, Snow is like, "What's the mission?" And then Crown immediately is like, tells her that no raptures will enter the castle or enter the kingdom. And then Snow's like, "Roger that," and Scarlet's like, "Got it." And so some time goes by, and Chime is repaired. And being treated, but still being treated. And so the crew then talk about several things. They talk about the seed. They talk about guarding the place. Now they need to ensure that it's protected, and they need to destroy like the threat. And they talk about they can't just like stay here because the siege. They're going to get overrun by the siege. They talk about. And then the aunties all talk to. Okay, they talk about everything they need to do, and then the aunties. So Pioneer all talk to their niece, Marion, about how she's doing, and talk about how she's grown up a lot. She seems a lot more mature, and they're so excited to see her and stuff. And then Rapunzel's like, "Oh hey, now that you're a little bit mature, I have something for you." And she slips her like a USB drive or a CD or something, and it's pornography, of course. And then Marion's like, "Oh yeah, very good." And then it's like wink, and Kilo's like, "What's that?" And Rapunzel's like, "Don't worry about it." And then the Pioneer kind of like steps off on their own, and they're talking about the situation, and they mention like contacting us, and it's like, no, we're super busy doing shit. And then they mention Eden, and Snow's like, fuck that, no. And then they're just gonna go prep the defenses. Meanwhile, Indivilia is stewing. She's so pissed off. She's like, I'm gonna kill that motherfucker and all that stuff. And then Chatterbox, they talk about how he's gonna come as well, and they're gonna do like a super attack with like a huge horde, and they're both gonna attack, and they're gonna fuck these people up. And then Chatterbox is like, I'll come, but you have to not touch Marion. That way they can work together instead of working separately. And then there's like some weird back and forth again with Indivilia being like, is that an order from you? And he's like, no, it's a warning, and not about me, about Marion. And she's like, okay, sure. Back over at the kingdom, the Pioneers are getting ready. They see the Raptures coming. And then we move over to Crown and her subjects, who also feel them approaching from inside. Crown asks Chime, or asks if Chime is in a safe place, and someone's like, yeah, it's the safest in the kingdom. And she's like, oh, let's go stop this. And so as Indivilia approaches the wall, she uses her transformation to create an energy spike and just like blow the shit out of the wall. Transformations into like a scorpion type creature. Kilo freaks out when she sees this, and so Scarlet goes to face Indivilia one-on-one, and then they recognize each other, or Scarlet recognizes Indivilia. She's like, oh, it's you. And then Rapunzel and Snow go to hold off the Raptures and to repair the wall. Right, so they're taking care of that business. Elsewhere, Crown and Kilo are approached by Chatterbox. Marion and Kilo are approached by Chatterbox. Chatterbox wants to talk to Marion, and he's like, don't you remember me? And she's like, no, I don't remember anything. And then at some point, Crown intervenes, and to defend her subject. Chatterbox jumps Marion and starts trying to get her to remember, and then Kilo goes to defend her, but gets knocked back. Then Marion extracts herself, and Crown attacks. Chatterbox taunts them and like runs off. Crown orders Kilo to take care of Marion, who is complaining about a headache, and then leaves. Kilo doesn't know what to do about Talos, or doesn't know what to do, but Talos tells her to go hold her hand, right? So she pops out of Talos and goes and like just holds Marion's hand and like rubs her back and stuff. Elsewhere, Scarlet and Indivilia fight and chat about how Indivilia is like a psychopath. Scarlet ends up cutting off her tail, she regrows it, and then Crown shows up and wants to fight. And Indivilia mentions hating to transform. But versus all of them, she would have to. And so instead, she just vomits up a bunch of alpha particles and talks about how it can interfere with the communications and also can sometimes mess with Nikke's. And Scarlet is like, whatever. And then Crown is like super messed up. She starts coughing and like getting a headache and all this stuff. And apparently, the alpha particles are like poisonous to her specifically, which ends up not being true, but they talk about that as if it is, which is super unusual. And then Individual is like, ah ha ha ha, I'll kill you slowly. And then she like nopes out of there. A bit later on, the Pioneer is repairing the walls with Kilo and Talos when Rapunzel's off sitting with Marion trying to take care of her. Crown is like super struggling because after she like vomited up a ton of alpha particles, however that works, she then like is releasing like a miasma of alpha particles over into this area, and so there's just like a huge concentration of them in this area, right? We then get word that Chime is awake, so everyone goes to head over to meet with her. And she's great. And I love Chime. She's the fucking best. And then she's like, Your Majesty, or Your Highness, I need to speak with you alone. And so they go, and then Chime's like, I fucking hate Indivilia. I want revenge. And not because she tried to kill her, but because she treated her with like disdain and dismissal, essentially being like, oh, you're not worth my time, you're not worth, like, you're not a threat, blah blah blah. And she's like, I'm gonna show that dumb bitch that I am a threat. And then Crown promises that one day it'll come, and it fucking does. Like when it happens. Anyway, back outside, Chime explains that most of the land around this is where we get this information about the castle. Most of the land around the castle, because it's an artificial island, and that there's like shit that's been built up, but it's very flimsy. And so you can notice if you pay attention, when the Raptors step in it, it slows them down because they start to sink a little bit. And so they can use that to their advantage. They can like destroy it completely to provide just like one entrance outside of like aerial Raptors to get into the castle. And there's not like any aerial Raptors around here, like Stormbringer or whatever. And so they'll if they can blow all that shit up, then they'll create one entrance. And Kilo has some like self-esteem issues again, and Chime starts handing out assignments, and then Kilo mentions she wants to speak to Crown alone. So Kilo tells Crown that she's leaving, and that Chime can pilot Talos. And Crown is like, okay. And then they sit for a second, and then Crown's like, may I ask why? And Kilo's explains that no one needs her, that she has no reason to live, and Crown's like, "Are you fucking kidding me?" And she's and Kilo's like, "Yeah," and Crown's like, "You should go touch the breastplate of Talos," which you remember from Kilo's Bond story is the same thing that like the commander, like we were pointing out to the counters. It's like, oh, it sucks she's all alone, and it's like, well, she's not really alone. Look at the breastplate, and like, oh, all you think about is boobs, you asshole. And it's like, no, Crown's like, no, have you looked at the breastplate of Talos? And Kilo's like, what? And she's like, you should probably do that before you leave. And so then Crown like meanders off. And Kilo's like, I don't understand. So she goes to see Talos, and she's looking at the breastplate, and it's shiny, and it's bright, and it's unmarred and unmarked. And then she can like almost see her reflection in it, and it's completely smooth. And then she like starts to have like an understanding, because she looks around at the rest of Talos, and there's like scratches and cuts all up on her arm. There's like broken parts. There's dents. There's all sorts of like battle damage. But the breastplate is completely untouched, and the breastplate is right behind the breastplate is where Kilo sits. And then she finally like fucking gets it. And so they chat about how like Talos does everything in her possibility to protect Kilo, because Kilo is the one who gave her life. She's the one who created her AI, talks to her, became her friend, perfected her, all this stuff. And that Talos actually feels bad because Kilo feels bad, because if Talos was better, then Kilo wouldn't feel so bad, like she's a failure, or be concerned that they're going to fail, because Talos would be doing the job that she needs to be doing, which is protecting Kilo and helping her excel and be the best that she can be. So then they both have like a cry out, like the AI. And I fucking love this game. It's so awesome. Like I'm more emotional about this fucking AI and the cyborg chick than like all these fucking awful games and TV shows that have come out over the years. But this is fucking excellent writing. And then they swear to each other, they're never going to leave each other. They're always going to work with each other. They're always going to take care of each other. And it's like super fucking sweet and amazing. And yeah, excellent character writing. So a bit later on, Talos and Kilo find themselves making a whole bunch of bombs and stuff with Chime. They talk about how everyone else is doing. We get kind of like a little recap. Crown is resting. She's still getting sick and sicker, coughing a lot because of the alpha particle thing. And then Marion's like passed out and seems to have a fever, but Rapunzel's like attending to them. Kilo mentions that Talos can disperse alpha particles, and so that can help the problem with Chime, or with Crown. And Chime's like, no, don't do that. You'll see why later. Okay. So Kilo asks about Chime and Crown and how they met, and Chime recalls stumbling upon the castle, and that Crown was the only one left, and we know that she was like all alone. The rest of her squad had all but died. And then Chime learns about the superfood and everything, and then teaches Crown how to be a king. And if you remember from the Bond story, it's the whole thing was like Crown became a king because that's what it was, like Chime's wish, and the whole point of like her existence as Crown is to grant wishes. Essentially, the whole point of the kingdom is to provide like a place where people belong. Like that's Kilo's wish, that's Marion's wish, right? Like to do this thing for people. And then after Crown like accepted being a king, Chime swore loyalty to her. Back in the present, so she doesn't tell Kilo this, she just like thinks about it. So back in the present, she's like, no, some things I'm just gonna keep to or between me and Her Majesty, or His Majesty, or Her Majesty. Then Talos hands Chime a dagger. Chime's like, what is this? And she made it from one of Indivilia's tails that got cut off by Scarlet. And when you use it, it's going to cause like an immense shockwave, but you only get like one shot with it. And then Kilo mentions that Chime doesn't use a gun, which is interesting because she definitely does when she becomes a Nikke that you can use. But that's later. So, which is interesting. So over with Marion and the others. Marion is still freaking out. She pulls out a gun. The pilgrims like try to talk her down, but it's Crown who finally like gets through to her. She says if she wants, she can leave, but she has to choose what to do herself. Like she has to choose. Like the whole thing with killing the Raptures like upsets her, but also she like understands that like these are her friends, and like she's just got a lot of emotional stuff going on. And Crown is really like, hey, you can go out and be with the Raptors, or you can be with us. That's your choice. You have to decide. But I will always protect you no matter what, and you'll always be a subject of the kingdom. And that kind of finally gets Marion to like calm down, and she's like, I want to stay. So they let her rest. Outside, they talk about the final battle. Time for preparations to be made. Everyone aside from Marion meets up. They talk about going on the offensive, or like a defensive offensive, like doing stuff to like draw them out. So they're like taking the initiative more than that, but they call it like the offensive defensive or something crazy. Anyway, Crown, after they kind of like get all their stuff set up, Crown asks Talos if she has a loudspeaker, which she does because she has like everything, and then asks Chime if the explosions are ready, which they are. So then the Crown calls out to the Raptors, like calls a challenge to them, and then Chime breaks up all the land, like sets off the explosives and breaks up all the land, so only the main entrance can be breached, which means it's time to fight. Crown and Chime talk mysteriously about it almost being time, as she continues to like cough and have some issues. Then at that point, Talos detects that Chatterbox is coming. Everyone says stuff about like fighting, like they give like, oh yeah, we're gonna do this and do that and yada yada yada, and then Crown mentions that the charging is almost complete. At that juncture, Marion shows up because she wants to help. So she starts blasting the shit out of the Raptors because she's the best. And then she's apologizing to them while she's doing it. It's like some crazy anime stuff. So Chatterbox rolls in, and he and the Pilgrims go back and forth. Who is he? Why does he talk? Is he like a heretic? And he's like, I'll tell them all. I'll tell that all to your severed heads later. Yada, yada, yada. Then Snow calls out, encounter! They beat the shit out of Chatterbox again in like the battle that we actually played through. But, he gets super mad and then like activates like the Nihilister fire attack that he like absorbed when he like ate her. And at that point, Kilo like wakes up and she's like in a dark room and doesn't know what's going on. And then she notices, it's like she's still in Talos. She notices all the Pilgrims are down and that Talos is barely functioning. Chatterbox then starts approaching, talking about he's going to eat everybody and it's going to be so great. And then Talos is about to like emergency eject Kilo so that she can survive. But she reveals but then, like, we go back in time, we remember a conversation she had with Chime about Talos and Kilo having the same cores. So she's like, I know what to do. So she grabs, like, a power cable and shoves it into her core. So this, combined with Talos' core, gives him, like, superpowers. It's kind of like the dual core thing that Rappy, combining with the Red Hood core, does, right? So this gives like Talos like superpowers. So this automatically reactivates Talos, re-energizes, and because they're using the two cores, they only have like 3 minutes of time before they're gonna like totally burn out. And in that time, they beat the shit out of Chatterbox. Like they literally like break his arm and like tear off his head, and then Talos like tosses it over the wall after beating the shit out of him, and he's like, ah! And they really should have done. They should have smashed the head and been done with it. But you know, we gotta have Chatterbox because he's one of those recurring villains. So after that, they like save the Pilgrims and they're okay, but they're like fucking exhausted, so they kind of like pass out. Elsewhere, Crown, Marion, and Chime see that that the Kilo and the Pilgrims have defeated Chatterbox. They then see Indivilia like approaching and prepare. She rolls in and sees Chime, and she's like, "What the fuck? Are you twins?" And Chime's like, "Go fuck yourself." And then Indivilia's like, "I don't fucking care." And then she's like, "Crown, you will come fight me." And then Marion's about to go, and Crown's like, "No, you wait here. I got this battle." And so Indivilia taunts Marion some, says that she is not a heretic because there's something about like all the heretics can sense each other. So if she would have been born a heretic, she would have sensed him. If she died, she would have sensed that. But there's like no telepathic link, nothing going on there whatsoever. And then Marion's like, "Oh, you're right. I'm not a heretic." Which is kind of like strange. But then Chime hypes Marion up, and then Crown comes roaring in on Trombe and smashes into Indivilia again, knocking her down. And she's like, "Fuck you. I can't believe I fell for that same fucking thing again." And so at that point, she starts transforming. And then Crown and Indivilia face each other, and Crown's coughing a lot from the alpha particles, and Indivilia... So she transforms, and then we beat that, and then it's... No, this is all in the same thing, so we don't actually play that. So Indivilia starts releasing more and more and more, and just like dumping them, and Marion's about to go to help, when Triumph's like, "Nope. Give her a minute. She's got this." And then we head over to back to Crown. And then we get this fucking awesome video.
超高濃度のエブダ粒子を吐き出すこと、実に素晴らしい能力なのだ。しかし相手が悪かったのだ。
何が言いたいのです？
お嬢様の拡張武装、それはエブラ粒子で仕立てられる王のお召し物。貴様の切り札はお嬢様に捧げられた最高の貢ぎ物となったのだ。貴様は実に立派な仕事をしたのだ。
Oh, hell yeah. Crown activated Naked Crown. Naked King. Fucking awesome. At that point, Chime explains that the alpha particles actually were charging up the Naked King, and that the way things were just going naturally, it would have taken like another year or so for her to charge it up, and that part of the reason she's here is because of this Naked King thing. Or part of the reason she's here, she came here in the first place, was to like charge up the Naked King. Because she has some item then, the alpha particles are pretty strong here. But then when Indivilia, like the author of her own demise, started like dumping them out, they were like, oh, this is going to be excellent. We're going to be able to charge this thing up super fast, which they did. And then at some point, a wandering monk who is a member of Pilgrim named Nayuta, she came along and helped because she was able to like modify the device a little bit. So not only does it activate Crown and like all these powers, but now it creates these like shockwaves continuously, which just like destroy everything around them. So that every moment that Crown, like every movement she makes, creates a huge shockwave that just destroys all raptures in the vicinity. And so she's like just a walking devastation machine. And so she walks up, puts Indivilia on her knees. She's like, bow before your king. And then Indivilia can't even move. She's so like decimated by Crown's like overarching might. And then she's like, Chime, time for your revenge. And so she runs up and uses the knife she got earlier and just like stabs the shit out of Indivilia. The Pilgrims are like super fucking impressed. And because they'd heard about the Naked King from Nayuta, the fourth member that we haven't met yet in the game. And with that, Crown standing there in all her naked glory and declares it's time to celebrate because they finally defeated the Raptures, defeated the Heretic, defeated Chatterbox and everything. And the Pilgrims are like, maybe we should put some clothes on you first. Aside from Rapunzel's like, I think she looks great. Oh, man. Anyway, they mention this is where we get the name Nayuta from. That Nayuta is calling them, and likely something about like Nayuta is summoning them with a call at this point, so they can't stick around for the banquet or anything. So they head out. Once they leave, Crown and Chime talk about Marion. They think they should contact the commander and let him see her because of all the issues. But then Crown has like a very ominous feeling, and because she has an ominous feeling, like she's never wrong about these ominous feelings. Meanwhile, Kilo is talking to Marion. Everyone is rested and repaired. This is like later on. Kilo wished that she could have seen the Naked Queen, and Marion thinks about how it completely terrified her, right? Because she's got that rapture part of her. And that the thought of destroying all the raptures scares her. Then they go to the banquet. Marion gets up in the middle, and they get at the banquet. Everyone celebrates. They have a nice little thing, right? Later, Marion gets up in the middle of the night and heads toward. She gets this like feeling, like she feels almost like she's getting called. And so she heads out. Elsewhere, Indivilia and Chatterbox are leading a massive rapture horde. We find out that Chatterbox's head landed among a bunch of raptures, so again, you should just smash the shit out of it and just like numb them back to health. So he ate his way back to health. He then found Indivilia, who was like completely destroyed, and was able to help reconstruct her using rapture parts and like the nanomachines and stuff. And like that part of the thing with the Naked King is it decimated her nanomachines, so she wasn't able to like naturally recover. So because Chatterbox survived, Indivilia gets to survive, and terrible. And that it's essentially almost like a mind wipe situation where she is like, I have memories, but I'm not the same person because she had to be like completely reconstructed, essentially. But she does want revenge though, because she remembers these assholes doing this stuff to you. So they talk about that, and then Marion just like wanders up, and they're like, the fuck? And she's like, hi. And they're like, what are you doing here? And they're stunned, completely stunned that she found them and that she knows about what's going on, because she just walked through this massive horde of raptures. She then closes her eyes and then orders them to leave the kingdom alone. And when she opens them, she's got these stars in her eyes, which is like very important to notice right now, like who has stars in their eyes, because that becomes like a very important thing. And the only other person who's had stars in their eyes was Lilywise. So now Marion is the second person who has stars in her eyes. And then she orders them again to never attack again. And then Indivilia and Chatterbox get on their knees and bow. And they're both like, yes, my queen. And that ends it. What the fuck? So that's right. Marion's got some sort of like queen gene in her. And this is her connection to the raptures, and even though she's been like technically cured and she's got her own person, and this is why she's not a heretic either, she's like a queen of the raptures. What? Crazy shit. So excellent. But that wraps up The Last Kingdom and wraps up this video, so go ahead, like, share, subscribe, comment, and I'll catch you guys later. Bye.